Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on the Indonesian mining market. I'm Sheldon Varco, the Manager of International Projects at Austmine, and I'm very pleased to co-host this webinar with our partners at the Australian Trade Commission, or Austrade. We appreciate your time in attending today's webinar, and we hope that you find the session informative and valuable to your business engagements in Indonesia and the Southeast Asia region. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we meet today, which for me is the Gurungai people, and I pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Next slide, please. The webinar today is part of our Southeast Asia METS engagement program being delivered in cooperation with Austrade. For those who aren't familiar with your hosts today, so Austrade is Australia's international trade and investment promotion agency, and they connect investors and buyers with opportunities and capabilities through foreign direct investment and trade with Australia. And they have a very strong presence in Indonesia and Southeast Asia. Austmine is the leading industry association for the Australian mining equipment, technology and services, or METS sector, and we exist to promote the global advancement of technology and innovation in mining and to support our members to achieve success. We now have over 780 highly sophisticated mining technology and solution providers in our network in Australia. We're about halfway through the delivery of the current Southeast Asia METS engagement program, and we will touch base on more information about future activities towards the end of the webinar. Next slide, please. For today, we have a fantastic agenda lined up as we explore the latest updates and opportunities from the Indonesian mining industry. We'll kick off with Martin O'Neill, the Director of Renewable Energy at Brit Mindo, who'll provide an overview of the Indonesian mining industry, including the key commodities, players and projects. Following Martin's presentation, we have Stephen Scully, the Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner at Austrade, who will provide a brief presentation on some key market updates and trends to consider for the MET sector. He will then stick around to moderate the panel discussion, which will also have Martin on it as well. And we're also very pleased to welcome Stephen Nye, the Business Development Head of PT Contractors, and also Vincent Di Rosario, the Chief Operating Officer at Austin Engineering. So a great lineup of companies that we have for you today. We'll then conclude the session with some final updates and reminders on the next activities in our Southeast Asia program. And if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A box throughout the webinar to ask them. Next slide, please. Before I hand over to Martin, we would just like to set the scene by providing a refresh on the findings from the Indonesian mining market report as part of Austmine's METS Opportunities in Southeast Asia report, which kicked off our program. So these trends and opportunities will be explored more throughout today's webinar, along with receiving some additional insights and key new updates from our guest speakers. So Indonesia is by far the largest mining market in Southeast Asia, and they're a world leader in coal, nickel, copper, gold, and other minerals as well. This has also meant hundreds of Australian METS companies have been active in the market for many decades. Indonesia has emerged as the leading global powerhouse in nickel mining and has developed capabilities to produce battery-grade nickel for inputs to renewable technologies and EVs, along with producing nickel for more traditional purposes such as stainless steel production as well. Unlike other markets in Southeast Asia, which are still trying to develop their minerals industry, many operations in Indonesia are quite mature. There is therefore a focus on moving underground at these projects or perhaps investing in exploration in the region to find new deposits. And there's also a significant focus on cost efficiencies. Competition from suppliers has increased significantly in Indonesia in recent years, and many local firms have developed their capabilities as well to service the local mining value chain. So at a high level, what does that mean for METS companies? Well, given the maturity of projects, there is that focus on cost savings and productivity to get more out of less or the same amount of equipment and infrastructure. Therefore, smart solutions such as smart software or engineering services are much needed. Exploration and design solutions will be needed to fast track new projects or support the transition to underground operations for some projects. And finally, Indonesia's leadership in nickel production has enhanced the global spotlight on the industry, and therefore there's increasing pressure to comply with global ESG standards and to drive more sustainable growth. So as you can see, Indonesia is a market with significant opportunities for Australian METS, and that will be explored more throughout today's webinar. So with that high-level overview out of the way, I'd now like to introduce Martin O'Neill, the Director of Renewable Energy at Brit Mindo, to delve deeper into the Indonesian mining industry. Welcome, Martin.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sheldon. Next slide, please. Right, I filched this presentation from a training seminar that I did a couple of years ago, and with Sheldon's assistance, I've updated it. I'm not going to read every slide. There's only 15 of them, but we've only got 15 minutes, so we've sort of got to get on with it. But I will try and pick out some salient points from each of the slides to give you a bit of a view of what's going on there. Next slide, please. Indonesia has some significant reserves and is a significant producer. I think today we're going to focus at Sheldon's request really on the top three. Nickel obviously is a big deal at the moment, and Indonesia has the largest reserves in the world and the largest production. Interestingly enough, Australia is only just behind Indonesia with respect to reserves. And then Brazil, and then the rest of them fall away pretty quickly. So nickel is a very significant exercise here, but they've got some issues and some challenges that I'll talk about a little bit later on. Tin's a very mature exercise here, most of it based on the island of Bangka, and bauxite is pretty hot at the moment, although only 3% of the world's reserves. It's a very significant exercise. And obviously, China being the largest consumer of bauxite is quite nearby. Interestingly enough, Guinea holds the biggest reserves in the world, and that's a growing, will be a growing power in the bauxite world. Next slide, please. This is taken from the Minister of Mines presentation, and it really does give you a snapshot of the reserves and the resources available. Interesting enough, when you look at nickel, you'll see that the saprolite, the high grade nickel ore, at the moment only has a 9-year reserve, where the limonite, which is a lower grade exercise, has about 30 years. So there's a bit of a balancing act there for the Indonesian nickel industry to work out how they best balance the production, because right at the moment they're ripping into their saprolite reserves at an astounding rate. Next slide, please. I was going to give you a bit of a snapshot of the plate tectonics, just to give you a feel for why this has come about. Indonesia is just a mess of intersecting plates. Much of Indonesia, Kalimantan in particular, sits on the Sunda plate. And from the west, they've got the Indian and Australian plate, and from the east, the Caroline and the Philippines plate pushing in to produce a whole mess of subduction zones. And you can see production areas, bauxite, the little brown circle covering West Kalimantan, and then in Halmahera and Sulawesi, where all the nickel is, there's some green circles there just to demonstrate where those are. So, Indonesia is a big place, 5,000 kilometers from east to west, a couple of thousand kilometers from north to south, and there's an awful lot of opportunity and an awful lot of activity from a minerals perspective. Next slide, please. Right. This will give you a snapshot of the sort of greenfields opportunities that do exist. This is a little bit dated, but the information hasn't changed much. Some of these projects are very, very interesting. There's a decent number of the rare earths in there. And I must admit, I find the expression rare earth elements a bit misleading. Many of the rare earths out there are actually more common than copper, but they're called rare earths because they're pretty hard to get at and very hard to refine. One of the most interesting ones really is cerium, which is more common than copper. It's used all over the place in catalysts. It's used in optics, but it's described as a rare earth because it's really hard to win. There are some interesting rare earth projects available. There's also some interesting nickels out there, bunch of gold blocks. And as Sheldon mentioned earlier on, there's a fair number of Indonesian projects looking to go underground, and the underground expertise here is not as extensive as you might imagine, and much of it resides with PT Freeport in Indonesia, in Irian. Next slide, please. We couldn't talk about Indonesia without actually mentioning the coal production. And that's ramped up pretty significantly since COVID. Export over the last couple of years has increased dramatically. And you can see that in 2024, they exported 555 million tons of coal. And they produced 555 million tons of coal for their domestic market and exported 233 million metric tons. An awful lot of coal. And I think their export levels over that period were at least equivalent to what Australia was doing, which is quite amazing. Next slide, please. The government is pretty keen on demonstrating how they're going to use their coal market. And this is a slide that demonstrates their desire to run down the path of dimethyl ether, methanol, and methyl ethylene glycol. These haven't developed quite as quickly as one might have imagined, but there's still an awful lot of activity in the coal market and an interesting number of coke and coal projects that I think is crying out for some sophisticated approaches. So there's the 2 5-year plans, and then there's a 15-year plan from 2031 to 2045. And you can see there a number of the opportunities. If any of the companies watching this webinar or joining this webinar have expertise in those sort of areas, we'd be delighted to hear from you, but to see if we can't help you get into some of these projects. Next slide, please. Some of the bigger mineral miners in the place. Freeport, obviously. Anybody who's been in the mining business will have heard about Grasberg. Interestingly enough, it was discovered by a Dutchman in 1936, so it took a little bit of time to get it going. And even after they had developed the mine, they didn't actually discover Grasberg until they'd been mining Ertsberg for some time. Just behind Freeport as a miner is Aman Minerals in Nusa Tenggara, Sumbawa. Valley, interesting valley, was originally Inco out of Canada. That deposit was discovered in 1915, and they've barely scratched the surface on their reserves. There's a bunch of the big guys down there. Merdeka Copper, interesting, very well run outfit. They operate Tujuh Bukit, which means 7 hills in East Java. That's a really well run exercise that has a good number of Australian companies involved in what they're doing. And I'll talk a little bit more about Weda Bay and nickel industries, because Weda Bay is up in Halmahera. They have an enormous reserve valued at some 230 billion Australian dollars. Next slide, please. Right, Sheldon was pretty keen for me to talk about nickel mining and the downstream industries. As we mentioned earlier, Indonesia is the largest producer of nickel in the world, and with the largest reserves as well. In 2020, they banned the export of raw nickel and have greatly encouraged the development of smelters in the stainless steel industry. It's led to a bit of I think, a challenge in that a significant level of investment has come from Chinese companies by way of joint venture. Weda Bay and Morowali, and there's a photograph on this slide of the Weda Bay development, so you can see how significant that is. But I think there's almost a reliance on Chinese technology and Chinese investment in that area. This is obviously a reaction to the EV battery exercise, and Indonesia has positioned itself pretty well as an EV supplier. But if you're in the EV business, which I happen to be closely related to, you will have seen the value of utility-sized EV batteries plunge over the last year or so, because there is now a global oversupply of batteries. On top of that, there's also some environmental concerns, some social concerns, land grabs and the like. So that's a challenge for the Indonesian industry. Next slide, please. This will give you a snapshot of where the action is with regard to nickel. And you can see the number of projects in Halmahera, which is the island group just west of Papua, in the upper area. I should have put a circle around this. And then next to that, a little bit further east, is Sulawesi, and the whole eastern part of Sulawesi is just covered in nickel. So there's a huge number of projects there and a huge number of opportunities. Next slide, please. We're going to talk a little bit about the big coal miners. There's some pretty significant coal miners in Indonesia, and Bumi Resources being one of them. They run Kelton Prima Coal and Arudman. And there's a list there of the big guys who, interestingly enough, those 9 miners produce close to just under 50% of the Indonesian coal. So they are a pretty dominant force. And there are hundreds and hundreds of miners, but these guys really are the dominant forces. Next slide, please. Selection of Australian mining contractors. When I first wrote this list a little while ago, there was an extra one there that's disappeared. But Thiess and Leighton have been here for a very long time. McMahon Mining Services, everybody will know of. Petrosi, which really should be on the Indonesian list, that's ex-Clough, but they've become pretty much an Indonesian contractor. And Dharma Henwa, interesting, that's ex-Henry Walker, where Henwa is a play on the Henry Walker name. And then Proc, interesting, they've just about a year and a half ago opened their own factory in Surabaya. And they've been producing idlers for Freeport since Adam was on the milk ground, a pretty successful operation there. Next slide, please. Some very large Indonesian contractors worth mentioning. Interesting, Dharma Henwa on that list as well. Some of these guys have almost always come out of some joint venture. Palmer really came out of United Tractors. But these guys move a lot of material and are quite sophisticated operators. Next slide, please. It would be inappropriate not to mention the recent law changes because there might be some concerns over this. I don't think it's going to have a huge impact on what's happening to the sort of companies that Australian METS groups are looking for. There's expanded access for the small and medium-sized organisations. There's incentives for domestic processing, an increased role for universities, more support for the small, medium guys. But one thing that is important, obviously, increased mining royalties, which will have an impact on the big guys. But it's not expected to impact them other than the increased royalties. The rest of it is really background noise for the majors. But I thought I had to mention it. Next slide, please. Right, high-level summary of the Indonesian mining space, and I've just about run through my 15 minutes. Very small to very large operators, and everything in between. A lot of illegal miners, they follow no legislation at all. But the market is conservative, price sensitive, slow to accept new technology. No miner wants to be first to do anything. But there's some really, really good opportunities in rehabilitation, and especially mine closure. Carbon sequestration is a new deal, and I think there'll be pressure coming from importers, or people who are buying Indonesian products, to see that carbon accounting done and environmental compliance generally. But I've done my thing. Sheldon, thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot for that, Martin. Really good overview there of what's happening in Indonesia, and also some very comprehensive numbers. And good to list out some of those key organisations that Australian Mets should focus on as well. So very much appreciate that. Yeah, appreciate you sharing your experience with us today. And we'll hear from you in the panel discussion shortly as well. And now I'll hand over to Stephen Scully, who's the Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner at Austrade Indonesia. So Stephen has some key updates and information for Australian Mets, and then Stephen will moderate the panel discussion as well. So thanks, Stephen. Over to you.
Hi, thanks, Sheldon, and thank you, Martin. Why don't we just, in the interest of time, just move forward to the next slide. I've only got 5 minutes. I did these, well, my colleagues and I did this slide before seeing Martin's, but fortunately there's a great overlap and I guess common themes and common directions. I'm just going to pick up on perhaps more the commercially orientated points and where we see activity from helping Australian companies. So mining represents 6.7% of Indonesian GDP, really politically and economically critical to the government. It is it is their sovereign wealth. They have a really strong interest in making sure that the average Indonesian does prosper with this, and the current administration has really reinforced that. Just concurring with what Martin was saying, it's really a mature sector here in some ways, right? Active mines, 160, gold 22, nickel 14. So really well-established players. But there's also a growth spurt because of this, what we'll see here about soon about the downstreaming. So the Mets targets, and I'll be interested to test this in the panel session with the panelists. We see it as state-owned enterprises, local conglomerates. Martin highlighted those, and the contractors, and particularly the Aussie or Aussie-linked ones. We see these as the Mets target customers. Don't necessarily see the Chinese from current experience. So we also believe there's a big opportunity for Australian Mets companies here. But just to highlight, you really need a medium-term strategy. This is not a fly-in, fly-out, quick win sort of location. We'll go through some of the suggested methodologies here in terms of how to be successful, and we'll test that with the panelists as well. But keep that in mind. It's not a quick win. It's not a lift and drop, whatever you're doing in Australia into Indonesia. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this sort of covers somewhat of the area that Martin highlighted, the mining law update. It is focused on broader downstreaming, broader than extending it from nickel into the other minerals. And social engineering is becoming front and center, and it's part of the new president's vision as we go forward. Martin identified these as well, but highlighting national interest, domestic need obligations. I think Australians know all about that from the gas discussions that's going on there. The downstreaming we've talked about, wider participation in the sector, which is interesting. Cooperatives, SMEs, religious, indigenous organisations. Again, Australian companies have had experience with this. There's a downside to dealing with smaller companies in terms of their expertise and also access to capital. But there's also an opportunity, I think, from providing technical assistance and consultancy services. National interest around, end-use electricity, energy, critical minerals, etc. We've touched upon. Social engineering, which GEDC, gender equality, diversification, social inclusion, broader prosperity and welfare. Worker safety comes up. The use of local land and water, and the environmental impact and audits. So I might just move on to the next slide. So what does this all mean? So I guess concurring with Martin that, with tighter margins, increasing scrutiny, mining operations must adapt by embracing technologies that drive both profitability and compliance. So some of these advanced mining technologies are really focused on reducing costs, increasing productivity, meeting environmental safety standards, and training the future-ready workforce. Now, we've listed some of the Indonesian companies there, and a bit broader than what Martin did, but Nickel Industries was mentioned, Proc was mentioned. Then you look at the Australian Mets companies who have set up manufacturing here, Orica, Thiess, and Austin, and clearly we will hear from Thiess and Austin soon. Como Engineering as well, and then there's a number of service providers. With my colleague Melly, who's on the call, we just did a count of how many Mets companies we're currently assisting in market, and there's 14, which is a very healthy number. Over half of them are actually around technology-related products, and a number of those are around software enhancements, and Martin did mention that as well. So using technology to improve efficiency is really important. The other particular sectors we're assisting companies with are around, equipment, products, alternative energy sources, and supplies and commodities. Why don't we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so here's, in a way, our advice to how to capture these opportunities or how to pursue them. First of all, you've got to show up at mining events. We have Indo Miner coming up. We'll give you the dates on that pretty soon. Trade shows, Mining Indonesia is coming up. Indo Miners in June, Mining Indonesia in September, and join the local association, Austmine Cham, great for networking. You really have to know your product market fit. You may have to customize or to achieve the required price point in market. You need to showcase your market-leading products and services to mining companies. You need to be a frequent visitor to develop relationships at all levels, including with the government. And you have to find a local partner, I should say a good local partner, and collaborate with companies that offer products and services complementing your offerings, remaining visible and visiting frequently again. So this is why we've said it's a medium-term strategy. It's not a short-term, quick-hit opportunity to be pursued. And just how we can help you do that, if we can go to the next slide. Please, thank you. So how can Austrade help you? There is an online Go Global toolkit that's available for people who are really just starting to dip their toe into the Indonesian market, starting to assess it. It's online. I've given the link, and this presentation will be shared. Doing business in Indonesia, that's on our website, so you can get sort of that introductory information. And then Austrade's trade services, which I've alluded to previously, can help the businesses expand in the overseas market. So it's assessing market potential, develop export strategies, and find valuable contacts. Why don't we go to the next slide? Just to highlight Indonesia Miner, the theme is mining resilience, adapting to a dynamic future. The Jakarta team here will be participating and look forward to connecting Australian clients with Indonesian customers. That's more of a conference focused initiatives. Mining Indonesia, a bit different. It's more of an exhibition. That's in September. Australia is hosting an Australia Pavilion. It'll be over 20 Australian companies. We're still open for expressions of interest to join this particular event. And there's the link which you can use to do that. So that's the end of my presentation. Just go to the next slide. So there's my email address, and Melly, that's hers as well. So on that quick run through, we're going to switch now to the panel. And so the panel discussion. So Stephen Nye, Business Development Head for Thiess Contractors. We have Vincent, sorry, we've switched back, have we?
We just pop the slides back up, guys.
Yeah, okay. So we have Vincent from Austmine Engineering, and Martin will join us as well. So we have an established contractor, an established manufacturer, and Martin, and there's probably some questions around as well around that. So if you've got, I see there's a couple of questions coming through already, but first of all, we'll just go around the panelists and perhaps introduce yourself. So I'm going to start with Stephen from Thiess, just because you've been here the longest. I think it's over 30 years. So, Thiess has obviously grown and been successful over the past decades. So perhaps just a bit of a snapshot of where you're up now. What's Thiess's current thinking in terms of opportunities, where you go from here? Perhaps key learnings, I guess you've had over the years, or battle scars, may I say?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much indeed, Stephen, and thank you, Sheldon, for the invitation today. Welcome to all the delegates on the call today. My apologies. I'm in a car at the moment, as you can probably see from my video, in between meetings. The market here is very dynamic, so it's very different from an Australian, a European mentality over here. You've got to be adaptable. You've got to be flexible. You've got to be nimble to operate in this market. To again harper upon, what Martin has said, and also Stephen, network is the key to success in this country. Network is everything. It's very, very fast over here. What we respect in the West, in the Western society per se, is not necessarily here in Indonesia today. So we've got to be able to understand that and respect that at the same time. But we maintain that commonality and respect for the local culture and communities at the same time. Indonesia is massively diverse. Halmahera, Sulawesi, you're talking about different cultural sects, you're talking about different religions at the same time, and you're going to be mindful of those at the same time. It's a very, very difficult dynamic to work within, but it's also very rewarding if you understand it. As Stephen mentioned before, it's not a short-term, let's go in, jump out, take your money and go. It's got to be a mid to long-term investment. And I think through the collaboration between the governments, Indonesia and Australia, is that relationship is now burgeoning, and forming, very, very nicely. There's also an agreement between Indonesia and Australia, which Steve would know better than I, called CEPA, which allows for a free trade, free tariff incentive between the two nations to transfer technologies and incentives and ideologies at the same time. You're coming into a relatively mature market, but immature, particularly in the nickel and the bauxite and so forth. The coal industry here is very mature. Thiess today is a small contractor compared to where we were, 30 years ago. We were a pioneer 30 years ago. But now the technology, the advancement, the education that Thiess brought into the country through Australia, through the TAFE, and our learnings at that given time, has been able to empower the national workforce here, and they're blossoming. Just to come back on Martin's notes before, some of his numbers were incorrect. Sorry, Martin. Indonesia is moving towards 1 billion tons of coal production this year. The majority of the coal, 75%, will go for export, and 250 million ton is for domestic consumption. Now, a lot of that consumption is being taken about through the smelters, through the EV network. A lot of that investment is coming through China and so forth at the same time. But there's great opportunities because Indonesia is a sponge for learning. And again, it's not a country where you can impart the knowledge that we've gained over 200, 300 years of history, of our Western learnings, to bring it straight in there and assume that we're going to make differences tomorrow. It's a slow, long-term philosophy. So you've got to bring it in there slowly and work together with the people, but the opportunities here are immense. You've got to embrace the culture, you've got to embrace the communities, you've got to embrace the environment with which you work in, but the opportunities are immense. So,
Correct.
Have I said too much?
Great. No, thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Very good. And just a note on the closeness of the governments. For those that don't know, Prime Minister Albanese is here, spending all day with the president, and it's his first, obviously his first trip since the election win. So that just gives you a sign of the importance of Indonesia. Okay, I'm going to now go to Vincent from Austmine Engineering. So Austmine Engineering, I think, have been here about 11 years, or at least they've set up manufacturing operations 11 years ago. Hopefully my timing is right. And it's in Batam, which is a special economic zone. That's a 30-minute, 40-minute ferry ride from Singapore. But perhaps Vincent, just tell us why Indonesia, why Batam, and how's that working out for you as a manufacturer?
Yep. So 11 years ago, perhaps the rationale for setting up in Batam was maybe a little bit different with, as Martin pointed out, nickel, tin, bauxite, gold, all very prominent, and they have been in Indonesia for such a long time. Key to supplying in Indonesia is to have a local presence and to manufacture locally. My background is oil and gas, and I used to have the same, working with BP Migas and Co, where I also fabricated on Batam Island. So local content is important to the business sector. So opening a production facility there, I would say would have been a good move back 11 years ago. I wasn't in role then, but today, more recently, we're in a major development growth for our facility there in Batam. We've recognised that it comes back to the talent pool on the island of Batam, especially. And I go back all the way to 2008, my relationship with Batam Island and working there. And they've got a rich pool of good, strong talent, which has been nurtured by the oil and gas sector. So McDermott's are there, Cetrium, which is the combination of a couple of major Singapore companies, all there, building big topsides and FPSO modules, etc., which then gets sent across to Singapore for fitting onto their FPSOs. But there's a deep level of skilled labour there. And we've plugged into that very strongly as Austin, to the point that now we've got our own syllabus in some of the technical colleges because of the work we do. It's quite bespoke in terms of high, hard, quench and tempered steel. For us as Austin, places like Australia, USA and Chile, the talent pool for industry in heavy manufacturing is shrinking. The kids there are competing with, we're competing with kids that want to look into business and professional careers, accounting, engineering, IT. So fewer and fewer young people in these countries are looking at heavy manufacturing, sort of boilermakers, fitters, welders, etc. So Batam offers a strong workforce for us, and it suits us well. Sure, there's automation. People might say, well, what about automation? And there's a place for automation, but in our size of business, we're not a Hyundai shipyard where they've got massive automation robots to build these ship hulks. We don't have that kind of capital, and I don't think there really are machines that have been built for that yet. So whilst we can bring in cobots and a few welding robots, you're still going to need people to work on that. And there's two types of people. There'll be the actual welders and stuff that we'd need, and then you'll need the mechanical, electrical type people, electromechanical people to service the robots. And the other point I want to make about Batam is that whilst they've got a strong pool of trades labour, they're also developing quite a strong technology focus as well. Just down the road from us is Infinite Studios, I think, where they do CGI graphics for movies and stuff. So they're pretty good. And so for Batam 18 months ago, we made the decision. We were struggling with labour in Perth to move all of our tray production, which are the big truck bodies, to Batam for all new production. In Batam at the time, 2023 October, we could barely do 8 trays per month, and now, within 8 months, I think we got up to 30 trays per month. We put into an advanced manufacturing, no robots, but jigs and fixtures, and we trained everyone in a different way. We trained them in manufacturing as opposed to being a fabrication type shop, in which they took to, and very good. So we have many reasons to be there now, and it all started, I think, with quite a vibrant mining industry to supply our products to back in the day. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, Vincent. It's a great success story. I might turn to Martin now, and he thinks he's answered one of the questions, but I'm going to pick up that around the remediation and land use post mine closure, because we talked about some of these mines reaching maturity. And I know, Martin, you mentioned you'll pick it up after the session with James, but perhaps just give a few overall comments. I mean, I'd lead off and say it's probably not going that well, or it's not that well done. But if you would like to share your thoughts.
Absolutely, I completely agree, Stephen. Historically, Indonesian miners walk away, and that's not appropriate. There's a significant government fund that is available, and I think there's a significant opportunity there for people with the right sort of skills and the right sort of partnership. But interestingly enough, I've discussed this with Stephen Nye from TEAS. We've had a couple of discussions on this, and I know Stephen has some strong thoughts on this. Are you still there, Stephen? He's
Yep.
there.
Still here, Martin, yes.
Mine closure, mate.
Look, mine closure here is becoming very predominant in the government, what do you say, vision, because historically there's been a lot of illegal mining in the past. A lot of corruption drove that at the same time. So there's a lot of disruption of land, contaminations at the same time. So there's huge opportunities there where miners here, whether you're a coal miner, a nickel miner, or a government miner, you have to put money into a bond. It's called the JAMREC fund. Now, those funds have not been utilized yet to remediate those lands that have been abandoned by illegal or legal miners who have fallen through the wayside. So there's great opportunities there where you've got depletion of the soils in Indonesia. So, CSIRO, for example, or technological companies that can help to remediate that provides enormous opportunities in Indonesia.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, but to do it successfully in Indonesia, you've got to have the right partner, you've got to have the right technology, and you've got to have, as both Stephen and I and Stephen Scully have said, you've got to have some medium-term view on the exercise. This is not a fly-in, fly-out. Yeah. I must admit, over the years of introducing people into Indonesia, if I had a buck for every time someone comes out of the first meeting, claps their hands and said, "We've got that deal," I'd be retired now. And it's not the case. This is a place that requires, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Excellent, thank you. So Stephen, I might go back to you. So, but pick up on the theme that Australia has higher value-added products. Now, in some ways, I view you as a customer for Australian METS companies, being a contractor. You purchase services and products and things. But what do you think? How should Australian high-end products solutions approach Indonesian customers?
Or
any advice?
Yeah, look, it's in my role, and I'm relatively new to TEAS as the BD head in Indonesia, but I've lived here for a long time. Relationship is key to success in this country. Building the right network, aligning yourself with the right partners, transparency, honesty, being adapt to, this is a very, very fast moving market. It's not as regulated, let's say, as a Western culture. So you need to be able to align yourself selectively with the products and services that you provide. It's a very, very cost-sensitive market. Value and technology is not necessarily appreciated outside of the maybe 10% of the mining companies over here, but it's demanded. And the regulatory framework here is demanding environmental compliance, for example, especially in the nickel industry. And the nickel industry will move into the bauxite industry and so forth, the rare earths, and more towards Eastern Indonesia, West Kalimantan. So the way that I see things moving forward from the METS is that, and I think I've wrote down in my my list, and I apologize, I didn't provide you slides today, but there's 7 or 8 areas of which we can target through the METS. AI is certainly one of those. Indonesia is a very tech-savvy nation. They're very, very smart individuals, highly educated today, as opposed to what they were, 30 years ago. 2, environmental compliance. The government is demanding that. So again, how can we support them on an ESG through the METs, through G2G relationships? I think is highly critical. The third one, there's a lot of mud, a lot of rawa, as they call it in Indonesia. So rainfall here averages in central Kalimantan, say 4.5 meters per annum. So again, rehandling of mud material for their thermal coal and also their metallurgical coals at the same time. Logistical solutions is key. It needs investment, and the central government will not provide the investment. They're always looking for the private sector to provide that investment. So again, some sort of technology or solution that provides a toll fee, like as we do back in Australia or the UK or in the West, a centralized system, for example. Quality control. If you're looking at which is the booming industry, as Martin touched upon before, nickel, Indonesia is #1 in the world. The EV revolution is now kicking in, and the environmental disaster as a result of that is phenomenal in Indonesia. It's more detrimental to the environment than what coal mining is, to be honest, if you look at the devastation of the landscape. So therefore, more selective mining, QA, QC controls, quality control assessments of those resources. And there are companies here and consultants that do that in Indonesia. They're trying to impart that. But you're dealing with a relatively, outside that, a few companies, and Martin touched on those companies before. There's 4,500 something concessions in Indonesia. So only 10% of those are well known or recognized internationally. It's the smaller tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 contractors that need the assistance, and they're begging for assistance. So how do we impart that? But it's a very, very cost sensitive market. So you've got to go through the national network, set up your framework, or seek the advice through Stephen and Austrade, Martin at the same time, or other individuals who are very well established in Indonesia that can align you and guide you in the best possible way. Again, touching on my original introduction, Teeth has been here for 35 years plus, but Teeth today, we've been overtaken by the Indonesian contractor because they're more nimble, they're more flexible, they can adapt quicker to the market regulations. So political alignment and network and flexibility to adjust and adapt to that current climate in Indonesia is really important.
Excellent, great. Thank you very much. Really, that's a great list. Have to compare notes after this. So I'll go to Martin now. I think you touched on renewable technology space, but we Austrade have tried a lot of things already with trying to get Australian products in here. But any particular opportunities that you see? Is there a timeline? This alternative energy sources. Everything sort of still seems to be by diesel, and it's just a cost factor as well.
Yeah, this is a pet topic for me because I'm quite closely aligned with it. But the solar hybrid exercise now beats coal and beats diesel hands down. Sorry, beats diesel hands down. Coal will always be king when you've got a big enough load. So there's a real push, I believe, into the miners for renewable energy. But miners are very slow to adopt these sort of technologies. And it'll take time. It'll come eventually because there'll be pressure from their buyers to adopt these sort of technologies. And I think over the next decade or so, we'll also see a lot of electric vehicles start pushing into the mining space. They're already getting there. There are quarries in Switzerland where they have electric vehicles that never need fuel. And that's a pretty interesting idea, isn't it? And they never need fuel because they go downhill full and come uphill empty. And they use reactive charging to charge their batteries. It'll come, it'll get there, but it'll be slow. And I don't I see it being incremental. I don't see them making much progress over the next 5 years, but I see them in the medium term making some good progress. And obviously, in the long term, the net zero pressure will come on. I don't think they'll make it, but they'll certainly make noises like they're trying. And obviously, we've got to see what happens with the coal market. At the moment, the coal market is strong. The price of coal is not as strong, but the coal market itself is fundamentally pretty strong. And I think there's, it'll be a slow process. I'm bullish about EVs in mines, though, simply because when you sit down and do the numbers, it kicks the hell out of diesel.
Okay, great, thank you. So Vincent, I might ask you now. As a manufacturing company, what advice would you give to METS companies who are considering setting up manufacturing facilities in Indonesia? Is there a process to follow in terms of strategically how you do that and do's and don'ts, etc.? You're on mute, Vincent.
All right. Sorry.
Yep, there you go.
Yeah, I think it's been mentioned a number of times already. You need to be in it for the long haul. As you mentioned, we've been in there for 11 years. And you've got to kind of crawl, walk, run, I suppose, is the best way to put it, to understand the culture and where you're at. I can speak on behalf of Batam. I haven't really been in any of the other regions within Indonesia, and I understand it's quite culturally diverse. I've travelled there myself, but not opening up any businesses. But I think for manufacturing businesses, for even other businesses that might be in sort of waste services, for example, if you just look at that totally outside of METS, or maybe related to it, if you've got something where you've got a process that you need doing, and you can bring that product in quite reasonably priced, because you're on a major shipping route with Singapore just across the water, and in fact for most of Indonesia, and then you can also export that product. I think that's one of the key sort of decision makers for us. Anyway, we bring in steel and we send out truck trays. Well, this wasn't by design. This is my normal screen grab behind me, and that's a freighter loaded with 10 quite large truck bodies from Batam port heading to Australia, to Mackay, I believe. So setting up there, I think, is good. If you get into one of the special economic zones, obviously you've got all of the usual benefits, tax benefits. I think there's tax holidays as you start up early. We've been through all of those already. But you've got import duty exemptions. You've got much more simplified customs and international trade processes. So all of that, I think, bodes well for companies looking to set up in Indonesia. As I mentioned, an able, vibrant, and enthusiastic workforce. Gender diversity was mentioned somewhere along the way. Some of our best welders are females. We specifically look for female welders as well. Currently, we've got, I think, 7 females. We're about to double that this year. And they actually do a better job at the welding than the men do. They've got finer touch, which you wouldn't have thought. Yeah, you think welding on big steel things was probably a man's job, but they do very well. So, you've got a good workforce. They're enthusiastic. You've got an environment, a business environment that's looking for growth and to help you develop. So I think, coming in with a longer term business plan for Australian METS companies would be key to that, but taking all of these advantages as well.
Great. Well, listen, we've come to the end of the time, but I think the 3 panelists, Vincent, Martin, and Stephen, have, I think, provided really insightful comments for anyone thinking of setting up here in Indonesia or actually expanding in Indonesia. So we really appreciate you guys taking your time. There's a few questions that have come through. Apologies, we don't have time to answer those, but we will respond, and through the appropriate expert in there. So on that note, I'll hand back to Sheldon for the closure.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot for that, Stephen. And those were some terrific insights of the panel there. Very diverse range that you covered in that, and a really vibrant discussion. So we really appreciate that. We'll now move towards the end of the session for today. So next slide, please. Excellent. Looking at the broader Southeast Asia engagement program, we're about halfway through for our activities now. And there's many more things coming up in the coming months that the MET sector can get involved in. Next slide, please. So similar to this Indonesian mining market webinar today, we have our final part of this market webinar series on the 29th of May, which will look at the Vietnamese mining market. So a good opportunity there to understand how some updates in recent mining laws are looking to really develop the sector and will create opportunities for METS companies. We also, of course, last week had the Philippines mining market webinar, which you can now access the recording to as well. Next slide, please. And of course, we have the Global Resources Innovation Expo happening next week in Brisbane. We have some great delegations coming out from Southeast Asia, so a really good opportunity there for METS companies to network and expand their footprint in the region. We have from the Philippines our largest delegation with 25 plus in that group, led by the Honorary Antonio Loizaga, who's the Secretary of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. We also have representation from Vietnam with Masan High Tech Minerals and also Vina Coman, which is the national mining group. And also Indonesia, we have PT Freeport Indonesia participating as well. So great opportunity to network and expand business opportunities. And you can also register. There's a few spots left at the Australia Southeast Asia Mining Innovation Exchange, where you can participate in some roundtable speed networking with those groups as well. Next slide, please. As mentioned at the outset, this Southeast Asia METS engagement program between Austmine and Austrade did come from an initial report that Austmine put together on METS opportunities in Southeast Asia. So that report is available as a resource. It goes into the various updates and trends from the mining markets and then translates that into what it means for the METS sector and what opportunities may arise. So you can use that QR code on the screen to download a copy of that report as well. Next slide. So that now does bring us to the end of today's session. I'd like to say a big thank you to Martin, Steve, and Vince for their insights on the panel. Yeah, really good, diverse insights and 3 different perspectives as well. So that was a great, rich panel discussion. And a big thank you to Stephen and the team at Austrade Indonesia as well. Yeah, well moderated today, and thanks for the support, continued support for the program. Thanks to everyone who's attended today as well. And we look forward to seeing you at another webinar soon. Stay safe, everyone. Thanks.